The shockwaves are still coming after Donald Trump's sweeping new tariffs on all imports into the United States. China has hit back today, announcing an extra 34% tax on all American goods being sold there. They've accused the US of bullying and endangering the global trade order. And in the last few minutes, Donald Trump has accused China of panicking in their response. Then there's the rout on the markets. Well, that was the opening bell on the New York Stock Exchange. The Dow Jones down nearly 3%. Stock markets around the world have been in free fall since the tariffs were announced. Meanwhile, the UK Prime Minister is expected to hold calls with international leaders this weekend. It's understood the conversations are likely to be with European and Commonwealth leaders, with no call to Donald Trump currently anticipated. So let's start this hour with this report from our business correspondent, Mark Ashdown.
Just a day after President Trump's announcement, China has hit back. From next Thursday, sweeping tariffs of 34% on all US goods being imported into the country, from machinery and electronics to oil and vehicles. This global trade war just escalated. It follows nervous smiles at the closing bell on Wall Street last night. Trillions of dollars wiped off the value of US stocks as the major indices suffered their biggest one-day falls for 5 years. Household names like Nike, Amazon and Apple saw their values plummet. This was how the global financial markets reacted to Donald Trump's tariffs. Asian and European stocks followed, down across the board, as fears of a worldwide recession took hold. The president insisted, however, everything was going to plan.
The markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom, and the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal?
Are you happy with the tariffs, Sakia? Are you going to get a deal before tomorrow?
No comment from the Prime Minister this morning. The government maintains any response will be calm and measured, although it has now drawn up a 400-page list of US products the UK could hit with tariffs of its own.
Well, of course, we don't want to see tariffs on UK exports, and we're working hard as a government in discussion with our counterparts in the US to represent the British national interest and support British jobs and British industry. Those conversations are ongoing.
Every country, including the UK, has been hit with a baseline tariff of 10% on all goods being exported to the US. EU member countries are facing double that, a tariff of 20%. Goods being exported from Japan will be subject to a 24% tariff. The highest rate is being applied to China at 54%. European stocks have continued to slide in response, but the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, taking part in the NATO summit this morning, said the pain would be short-term.
Businesses around the world, including in trade and global trade, they just need to know what the rules are. Once they know what the rules are, they will adjust to those rules. So I don't think it's fair to say economies are crashing. Markets are crashing because markets are based on the stock value of companies who today are embedded in modes of production that are bad for the United States.
China, first row.
As well as announcing tariffs, China has also filed a lawsuit with the World Trade Organization, claiming the US tariffs are tantamount to bullying and seriously violate international rules. This trade war is fast-moving, the outcome increasingly difficult to predict. Mark Ashdown, BBC News.
Well, let's get more on the Chinese reaction we've seen through the course of today. Here's our correspondent, Steve McDonnell. He's in Beijing for us.
Well, this is disastrous news for any US company that wants to sell into the huge Chinese market. It's even worse for agricultural producers. They already had a 10 or 15% tariff on them following Donald Trump's last tariffs on China. Now you're adding 34% on top of that. Beijing says this is taking the US to the World Trade Organization. It's also blocking the sale of rare earths into the US. Now, these are important in the production of electronic goods. But worst of all, really, it's the outlook for the global economy, because the world's two biggest economies are at each other's throats now. The relationship is collapsing before our very eyes. Previously, they'd been so interlinked. And now you've got these trade barriers going up in this tit-for-tat war. Who knows where it's going to stop? And really, for all countries around the world, it is potentially catastrophic.
Well, that's the latest from Beijing. Let's hear from our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman. He's in Brussels where that NATO meeting has been going on. He told us more about the reaction there's been from the White House team.
Well, remember, first of all, this is a defence gathering, but these 32 foreign ministers gathered within hours of Mr. Trump making that announcement on Wednesday night. And it has been a dominant issue, not just at the margins, actually, but even in the Central Policy-Making Council meeting yesterday, where my understanding is that European foreign ministers put the issue of these tariffs directly to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. And what you heard in that report there was some of his response. He is dismissing those concerns. He is also dismissing these sharp slides in stock markets with that explanation where he said, well, the markets are embedded in methods of production that are bad for the United States. What he means by that, that's his diplomatic way of saying what President Trump has said in his words, that he believes the world is ripping off the United States. But I have to say many economists dispute the entire basis of that type of analysis, saying that it puts goods ahead of services, and services are the big effective export of the United States. I've been speaking to European foreign ministers here. They are all vowing to retaliate. And the big fear, I think, for the White House now is of coordinated action, for example, between the Canadians and the European Union in terms of retaliatory tariffs. And certainly the Canadian foreign minister was hinting at that as she arrived here today.
Well, that was Tom Bateman. Let's talk to our business presenter, Tug Enright, who's here in the studio with me. You can see on the screen where the Dow Jones is, and it is open in the last hour and more red. We've seen that for days now since this tariff announcement.
We have. I think it's fair to say that this has all turned out to be worse than many investors had expected. You know, yes, there was a sell-off prior to Donald Trump's Rose Garden announcement. There was a sell-off afterwards because what he actually announced turned out to be worse than what many of them had feared. And then just over 3.5 hours ago, we got that announcement from Beijing, 34% retaliatory tariffs, export controls on those rare earth minerals that Donald Trump's prizes so greatly. And what you effectively got, to use a wartime analogy, is the return fire from the initial volley fired by Donald Trump on Wednesday night. We now have two of the world's biggest economies, the two world's two biggest economies, at loggerheads. And keep in mind, we haven't yet heard from the European Union and how it's going to respond to this. In the words of one analyst whose note I read earlier from Deutsche Bank, this is the market pricing in the likelihood of a recession, a likelihood that, in the words of Mohammed Al-Arian, the noted economist, is uncomfortably high. And it's, of course, not just a market story. The markets are a barometer of fears for what lies ahead. Fears about job losses, fears about inflation, and fears about what a continued high inflation could mean for the cost of borrowing.
Ty, thanks for taking us through all of that. We will continue to watch the markets board throughout the course of the programme. Let's speak now, though, to Kellyanne Shaw, who's Deputy Director of the National Economic Council and was Deputy for International Economic Affairs in the first Trump administration. Kellyanne, welcome here to the programme. So, how do you think it's going?
Thank you so much for having me. Well, I think it's pretty clear that President Trump's Rose Garden announcement was completely breaking the glass on the global trading system. So my assumption in speaking with different folks around the administration is that they're not surprised by some of the reactions from markets and from trading partners. But the message from the White House is very much just stick with us, let this play out, stick with us through Q4, and the American economy will be back where it needs to be.
You say the markets aren't surprised. Every analyst has been shocked that I've been seeing through the course of today. Consumers shocked by it. Prices now inevitably will go up. The Trump team quite open about that. Is that what American voters actually cast their ballot for, prices to go up?
Well, I think there's a difference between the messaging to Main Street and to Wall Street. And I think that the markets had priced in some increase in tariffs, but certainly the levels going up to 46, 49% in the case of China, 54 to 79% was shocking to the markets. And that's why you're seeing some of this really significant reaction, not just in the US.
But what about consumers? Because they know that prices are going up. That's what people in this administration are now saying is going to happen in the short term. I was looking a little earlier, the price of a basic iPhone is going to go up from $800 to $1,100. Groceries are going up. But we've seen what is happening to people's 401 pensions. That is not what people put Donald Trump in the White House to do, is it?
Well, I think people put Donald Trump in the White House to do many things, including transform the global trading system and to rebalance it in a way that's more advantageous to the United States. But you're right. Inflation was one of the top issues in the campaign. And so this is where the administration has to walk and chew gum at the same time. And that's why they're making the pitch to the American people of this is short-term pain. These tariffs will increase prices in the short term, but stick with us and see the rest of our economic package. And that's their case to make to the American people. But they are asking for that grace, and we'll see if the American people give it to them.
In the short term, I mean, the idea is to get manufacturing back into the US. Now, there are two problems with that. It takes years to actually build those factories. And for many of the companies, the other reality is that even with these tariffs, it is cheaper still to manufacture abroad. So actually you have all this pain and it is not going to deliver the desired effect, is it?
Well, what the administration would say to that is that tariffs aren't the only part of the president's economic plan. He also has tax cuts, deregulation, cutting of fiscal spending, energy diversity. And so all of these things taken together are going to incentivize companies to move to the United States. But clearly, the number one topic on minds of companies and investors right now are looking for certainty in terms of the tariffs. And what's been interesting is that the messaging coming out from the president and others as of last night and this morning has been these tariffs are here to stay for a while, and that companies should be making investment decisions based on, at the minimum, a 10% baseline tariff and potentially some of these larger tariffs. But I do think that many of them will come down in the next few weeks and months as these negotiations proceed.
The difficulty here is that he can't even convince his own members of Senate. Rand Paul was saying only yesterday Republicans have tried these sorts of tariffs twice before in the 1890s and the 1930s, and both times the Republican Party was destroyed. There is huge political danger here, isn't there?
Yeah, there were a handful of senators who voted against the fentanyl tariffs at the same time that the president announced these reciprocal tariffs. But senators like Senator Rand Paul are diehard free traders. They've always been in opposition to the president's economic agenda. So that's why you're hearing some of those comments come out. But I do think that most Republicans are with the president, at least right now. And I think we'll have to check back in a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year from now to see where the party's at.
That's interesting. You put in that clause. They're with the president right now. I was listening to a CNBC analyst describing these announcements and the policy and the strategies, kindergarten understanding of international trade. Even with the UK, you have pretty equitable levels of trade, and yet there's a 10% tariff that has been slapped on the UK. How does that make sense? And how does it make sense in terms of doing these things with traditional trading partners, traditional allies? The US is in danger of becoming a really unreliable partner now, militarily, when you look at Ukraine, Russia, and now economically with allies.
Yeah, I understand on the one hand the reaction from many allies who haven't faced tariffs like this before. But on the other, I do think that claims of a breach in the transatlantic relationship are a bit overblown, because what the Trump administration's economic ideology brings to the table is this idea that we can still be allies and also address our economic issues. And that's very different than previous Republican and Democratic administrations over history who have said that where we have a national security relationship, we're not going to raise some of those economic issues for the sake of that national security relationship. And what the Trump administration is doing is raising those issues up at the same time. And so they are walking and chewing gum.
Yeah, the trouble is people here in the UK are trying to work out what the economic issue is with the UK, given the trading balance between the two countries.
Well, I think the administration has pointed out many unfair trade practices with the UK. Overall, the relationship is balanced. But the president issued this national trade estimate that talked about the UK's digital services tax. He's talked about the VAT. He's talked about unfair and unreciprocal tariff rates. So those are issues that will have to be worked out. But he did announce with Prime Minister Starmer that the two countries would be negotiating some sort of trade deal. So my expectation is that those conversations would continue and there may be relief on the UK side.
Well, we shall see, because they've been talking about that trade deal for such a long time, but we shall see if it actually comes to fruition. Kellyanne Shaw, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Thanks for your time.